What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DT show. The Idaho Statesman just dropped a bombshell article about the Bryan Kohberger case, answering some of the questions we've had for a very long time. Like, for instance, whatever came out of that footprint on the second floor? Or what about the book with the underlining on page 118? They have all those answers and so much more in an article that was dropped today. We're going to break that down. But before we do, I want to just say thank you to everybody who's checked in on me and my family. My dad's and thoughts and prayers. My dad's he's still in the hospital. He has surgery scheduled for Tuesday at this time, and I just want to thank everybody that has sent in your thoughts and prayers. It's truly, truly appreciative. It means so much to me and my family, and I want to say thank you before we start today, and take the time to do that. And also want to tell you guys tonight about 7:35 p.m. Central. That's 8:35 on the East Coast, about 5:35 on the West Coast. We're going to be talking about this document or this article with Dr. Vona. We're also going to bring up an article that was referenced by The Independent a little bit earlier this week, referencing some of the people that were going to testify in the trial against Bryan Kohberger. A lot of bombshells in that one as well. That's going to be going on tonight. You don't want to miss it. It's a live show. Be a part of the conversation. We'll see you guys there. All right, without further ado, let's break it down. Let's get into this one. Now, I'm going to read some of this and kind of give you guys my opinion. I'm only going to talk about the breaking news aspect of it. I highly recommend you guys read all the in-between stuff. I'll start off with just kind of the intro, and then I'll kind of break it off into what is just the new stuff. So, consumed by 4 murders, Idaho police never stopped inside the search for Kohberger. And this is by Kevin Fixler and Alex Release, I believe is how you pronounce that. Moscow Police Corporal Brett Payne arrived at a white 3-story house in a neighborhood off the University of Idaho campus in Moscow on November 13, 2022. Payne walked through the crime scene for his initial pass that Sunday afternoon. Items were strewn about like that of a typical college student. He noticed nothing out of the ordinary on the first floor. That changed as he walked upstairs. There was a small second-floor bedroom. Payne saw a young woman, later identified as Xana Kernodle, with numerous stab wounds on her arms, hands, and face, lying on the floor next to her bed, and she was gone. Behind her, still in bed and partially covered by a blanket, was her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin. Now, him being partially covered by a blanket kind of is an indication that he didn't get out of bed. He didn't stand up. There wasn't a fight, because had he done those things, unless Bryan Kohberger staged something or positioned Ethan in the manner that he did and then placed the blanket over him, this is one of the reasons why I believe law enforcement believed that he attacked Ethan while Ethan was still asleep, because he was underneath his blanket still. He was also gone. Payne continued upstairs to the 3rd floor, where he saw 2 young women, later identified as childhood best friends, Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen, lying in bed beside each other, also gone. Next to the women lying was something out of place. Payne immediately spotted a key piece of evidence, a leather knife sheath. Now, this leather knife sheath was then taken by the Idaho State Police lab and obviously processed for evidence. And they do talk about a couple of the things that we already know. And one of the things that speaks about is that a patrolman stood guard at the sliding glass door of the kitchen, which was found ajar, meaning it was found open. And this is the picture that we've all looked at. Another thing that they talk about here is the fact that it says that the tips of the K-bar knives are known to break off when used in combat. Gilbertson said that didn't happen in this attack. No parts of the murder weapon have ever been recovered. So there's a debate going on. Was the K-bar knife sheath left behind on purpose? Was it not? Is it a calling card? Was it by accident? Now, if there was any evidence of a possible reason he could have left it behind, I don't know if it's necessarily a calling card, but maybe a red herring, maybe something to point officers in the wrong direction. Now, I don't know what type of expert Gilbertson is on K-bar knives. I know he's ex-military, so he's probably have hands-on experience with the knives. But, I mean, Bryan Kohberger did have 4 victims, and apparently it didn't break. So you would assume that maybe perhaps the murder weapon was of a higher quality or grade, possibly. But that's kind of what he's alluding to. And I think that's maybe the most evidence there being a possibility that there was a different weapon and the K-bar knife sheath was left behind. Me personally, I don't believe that to be the case. I think he did use a K-bar knife. He purchased one. They couldn't find it. And secondly, he left all the doors open. Now, he was a bit of a cat burglar. He's been breaking into houses since he was young. We read about that in the Idaho 4 American Tragedy. Go check it out. I have a playlist on it where we broke down most of the chapters. And there it talks about how in his, late teens, early adulthood, he would break into places. He stole things like drugs and prescription drugs and coin collections, knives, things of that nature from certain people. He hid in the woodline when he stole from Mark Bayless. They found Reese's cup wrappers in the woodline, and when they've discovered that their house had been robbed, or burglarized, I apologize. So he was a bit of a burglar, but he didn't touch doors very many often or very much. And one of the reasons would have been because, and we all read that statement that he wrote back in college, that was part of evidence. He was very conscientious of contaminating a scene, but the more times you touch something is the more likelihood that you're going to leave DNA behind or something behind. And so for him to have left the backsliding glass door open or any of the other doors where the decedents were, was an indication of that. I highly doubt he's going to leave a knife sheath behind that he touched. It just doesn't jive with me. It doesn't make sense. So to me, I don't think that's the case in this scenario. But if there was any possible evidence that it was left behind because of that, that's what you have. Within hours of arriving at the crime scene, a corporal in the police report said he collected a memory card of the surveillance camera. Investigators ran into technical difficulties and were unable to pull any footage. Now, this is from the light camera at 1112 King Road. The one they captured said image here. Now, they had to go back 4 days later on November 17th and actually get a different person that lived there that had access to it to send them a screen recording of what occurred that night. Now, I highly doubt that it was the full almost hour that they have that the Idaho Statesman dropped, which was from like 3:30 or 3:20 something to about 4:30 in the morning. I don't think it was that one, because I highly doubt they just had them screen record the whole thing. Maybe they did, but they did collect the light and everything else, and I'm hoping they were able to pull that out. Because if not, then I do think that Ann Taylor would have had a strong leg to stand on as far as its use in trial. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. But if it wasn't from the actual hard data, I think they would have had a problem with that. On November 20th, 7 days after the homicide, the Idaho State Police got lab analysis, according to court records, found a single source of male DNA on the button snap of the sheath. They ran the profile through the FBI's national database, known as CODIS, and received no match. Othram continued trying to flip the DNA profile from the knife sheath into a family name. The lab had begun to land on distant relatives connected through ancestry databases, but still no direct hit. Now, remember, Ann Taylor was pretty pissed off about the IgG and stuff. And, one of the things that they were saying was that they kind of knew that the FBI went through some back doors that they shouldn't have gone through. And I wondered about that. Like, how did they know that they did that to have found him? I mean, why would Bryan Kohberger suspect this as being the way that they found him? Before, because this is why they were requesting information, so they didn't have it all. So why would they be so because I mean, a number of Bryan Kohberger's relatives could have used a normal means way that Othram had, that law enforcement had access to, but they knew that not to be the case. Now, maybe the biggest clue was the fact that the FBI had to get involved and Othram couldn't find anything, and they were like, all right, well, obviously, if Othram couldn't find something through the normal means, maybe the FBI used the back door. But, we've read in other reports that a neighbor of Bryan Kohberger's had stated to reporters that Bryan Kohberger himself had told them that he was interested and had done his DNA through one of these ancestry profiles. Maybe Bryan Kohberger was aware that and sorry about that. Maybe perhaps Bryan Kohberger was aware and knew that it was his DNA, or that it was possible that it was his DNA, but that he had used Heritage, which supposedly didn't allow for law enforcement to go in there and utilize his DNA profiles. And so maybe that's why they were so confident in that prior to getting any information about it. But just food for thought there. Food for thought. Needing a spark, investigators asked Othram to halt their efforts and to rebuild its DNA profile needed for use in the IGG. The FBI stepped in and took over. Federal agents were handed full access to the profile on December 13th. So it only took them 6 days to find Bryan Kohberger. It's very quickly, very, very fast. So it might be an indication that somebody who was very close to Bryan Kohberger, if not Bryan Kohberger himself, is who they found through the IGG. When they began combing through databases for a match, they had further resources and some capabilities that we thought may get us somewhere quicker. And so we made the decision to then shift to the FBI and to continue that process. Just 6 days later, on the evening of December 19th, Payne and Gilbertson got a call from the FBI at a name, Bryan Kohberger. Now, me and the guys, I did a video probably about 2 years ago now, and it was referencing when they discovered Bryan Kohberger. And I've been saying it for a long time. You know, those that have been watching the channel for a while will attest to this, but I've been saying December 19th. And, you know, we went back and I looked at different, I think they're still out there, so you can go find it. But if you guys go back and find the video that I put out there or the live that I put out there, I'd appreciate it if you let me know in the comment section which one it was. But what I had done was we'd found out that it was December 19th through the New York Times. They had an article that brought it out saying that the IGG came back on December 19th. So what I ended up doing was pulling up all of the Moscow Police Department videos where Chief Fry was coming out and communicating with people. Some of it was talking about the White Elantra, talking about tips, this, that, and a third. And there was a recording for December 19th. And to me, I think it was aired out sometime in the middle of the day. When I looked at it, he was talking about the White Elantra, still saying it was a 2013 to a 2011, hadn't changed from that aspect. And then on December 20th, they dropped another one. And on December 20th, I was like, look at his face. Look at his expressions. Chief Fry looked like he had a good night of sleep. He looked healthier. He looked happier. And what he was doing was talking about who was involved in the case, kind of saying, hey, it's been Moscow Police Department. We've had these detectives here. We've had this. We've had that. Kind of taking ownership of the case. And I told everybody, I was like, they found out after this December 19th recording, but obviously before the December 20th, and you can see the big difference there. But we talked about December 19th being the date for a very long time. I had a lot of people come at me and say, no, it was November 25th. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. It's December 19th. And obviously, here we go again. The FBI came back with Bryan Kohberger on December 19th. It was absolutely surreal, just absolutely incredible disbelief, Gilbertson said. As quickly as we had it, we went to work. Kohberger was a graduate student at Washington State University, just over the Idaho state line in Pullman. He hadn't been brought up as a suspect to that point, so he was completely unknown to law enforcement at this point. So for those that wonder, hey, would they have caught him without it? There's a good possibility they could have. I think that some of the evidence would have still existed, like the phone evidence and the issues that he was having at WSU and all those other things would have still existed prior to, if he wouldn't have let the knife sheath. But man, this would have, I don't know if they would have ever brought charges up actually against him. But I think they would have figured out who he was eventually. His 2015 white Hyundai Elantra had been excluded in a list of potential vehicles, police told the statesman, because they had initially requested 2011 and 13 models, though they later broadened the search. But once they knew about Kohberger, he checked all the boxes. And we've talked about this, and I've said it. Obviously, they didn't look at the vehicle and change it until after they got Bryan Kohberger's name. I could tell that was obvious. And plus, the other thing, too, is it's also when evidence, as evidence comes in, as videos come in. I know that there's this wild expectation that law enforcement are going to walk into a crime scene and there on the table or on the beer pong table is going to be a box with all of the clips and the videos of where the White Elantra passed by in chronological order, timing it and dating it and all that other stuff throughout that way they didn't have to go through the 56 terabytes of stuff themselves, right? That's not how it works. So to me, it was never about what law enforcement knew week 1, week 5, week 6. It's what do they know now? Because it's not like December 18th, the fog lights looked one way, and then December 19th, they get Bryan Kohberger's name, and now the fog lights look different. That's not the case. Now that they have his name and they know what kind of vehicle, can they go to the white Elantra, the suspect vehicle, and compare those vehicles and say that this is not it? Is there something that sticks out that doesn't stick out? Is there a sunroof, which there wasn't? Is there a front license plate, which Bryan Kohberger didn't have one? Is there the fog lights? I mean, there's so many things that you can go through, and it's kind of limited based on the pixelated images that you have. But at one point, they thought it was a 2019 Sentra. At another point, they thought it was something else. It's what can they say now? Now, Bryan Kohberger could look at the image and say, hey, this is not my car because X, Y, and Z. All right, that's one thing, but that wasn't their argument. Their argument was never, this is not my car because of X, Y, Z. Their argument was, these guys didn't know it was my car until they got my name, which is not much of an argument at all. Kohberger wasn't in Pullman. Investigators said that they learned the same night he'd left for the holiday break from school to return to eastern Pennsylvania. The next day, December 20th, the FBI dispatched to his parents' home in the Pocono Mountains. Agents were inside the tucked away gated community and confirmed Kohberger was there. They began around-the-clock surveillance on the Kohberger family home. Gilbertson said as Idaho's investigators hurriedly worked toward establishing the grounds for an arrest warrant. On December 27th, investigators awaited for their chance and took trash from the Kohberger home. The next day, matched a discarded Q-tip as the father of the single-source male DNA found at the crime scene in Moscow. Payne filed an arrest warrant on December 29th, which the judge granted, and Gilbertson made plans to fly out to Pennsylvania immediately. Hours later, at about 1 a.m., the FBI and Pennsylvania State Police mobilized in the neighborhood and executed a raid on the Kohberger family home. Payne and Gilbertson watched on a live feed on their phones about half an hour east of the police station in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, as officers arrested Kohberger. At 2 a.m. on December 30th, 2022, Payne and Gilbertson sat across from the man they had been after for 7 weeks, and for the next 45 minutes, they interviewed Kohberger. Now, before I go further, I wanted to go back because maybe I unhighlighted it, but they talked about how when they watched Bryan Kohberger, they never actually saw him go into some trash cans and into the neighbors' trash cans. They thought that was something that was made up. And you know what? That might be a little bit later. Let me look. It actually is. But it's weird because the statement kind of goes back and forth. It talks here about how they couldn't find any of Bryan Kohberger's DNA in any of the trash. He'd been there for a while, right? And he had to have done something. In fact, when they arrested him and they found him, he was digging into the trash. So what was he doing with his trash if it wasn't? Obviously, they talk about how they didn't witness him throw trash into a neighbor's yard, and we're going to get into a neighbor's trash bin, and we're going to get to that part here in a second. I kind of went a little bit faster than I wanted to, but forgive me for that. But he was in his trash when they arrested him. All right, let's continue this. So this goes on to say at 2 a.m. on December 30th, Payne and Gilbertson sat across from the man they had been after for 7 weeks. For the next 45 minutes, they interviewed Kohberger. Based on guidance from FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, Payne told reporters they tried to keep it pretty surface level, just get him comfortable in speaking. He asked them several times to make sure his parents and their dog were okay. Police assured him that they were. Now, Dr. Vona had asked last time she was on the channel, why was this picture taken? So what probably happened is we saw there was a live feed where the investigators were, once they got Bryan Kohberger into custody, they showed him, is this your guy? There's probably a screenshot of that sent back to Moscow to the important folks like the chief of police, captains, things of that nature. And that's probably what this photo is from. Kohberger was advised of his Miranda rights and that he could remain silent, and the three made small talk. Kohberger applied only to WSU and the University of California, Irving's criminal justice doctoral programs, he said, because neither required a graduate entrance exam. WSU accepted him, and he and his father road trip to Pullman. He said they arrived July 1st, 2022. His first time in the Pacific Northwest, a neighbor in his graduate student apartment complex mentioned having met Kohberger's father, who was very talkative when he moved his son in. Text messages obtained through subpoena and explained in reports show that WSU professors had discussed Kohberger's interactions with female students during his time as a teaching assistant. In one thread, a professor told the group that they should consider performing an intervention on Kohberger after he offended several women. Kohberger planned to work as a teaching assistant again next semester, he told Payne and Gilbertson, but the university terminated his position and he also lost his funding for his PhD program. So he was lying. And keep this in mind when it comes down to the book that he had that we're going to talk about here in a second, because I know a lot of his supporters will come out and say, well, you know, he was planning on going back. He told people he was going back. They only fired him after he became a suspect or something to that nature, right? I don't think so. I think they told him they were going to fire him, and he knew well in advance. Kohberger had an interest in becoming a professor. He told the two Idaho detectives because he loved college and knowledge was far more important to him than money. And I think that was a big part of why he may have committed this crime, was the knowledge aspect. You know, I think he wanted to know what it felt like. I think he wanted to know if he could do it. I think he wanted to know a lot of things. I think he had studied and became fascinated with criminal justice and the criminal mind, and how he may have even found some commonalities between himself and some of the people that have committed these crimes, and thought of himself in those same manners. And so to me, like going back and looking at, for instance, the victim impact statements, I didn't think he seemed disinterested. To me, it was quite the opposite. I don't think he took what they were saying to heart or any of those things. I don't think he felt emotion behind what they were saying, but I think that this was a different aspect of a crime that he wasn't familiar with. You know, he was familiar with, when his studies, they talk about the criminal mind, why they do the things that they do, their motives, their interactions, things of that nature. But very rarely do you ever see, and I don't think I've seen, a college course on the impact that the victim's family endure during these moments and during these crimes. And so this is something that would be new to him. And I felt like he was taking it in, very interested, somewhat like if you were watching a YouTube video on something that you're really interested in. I mean, you're not making these faces and, you know, things of that nature. You're just sitting there and you're watching it, tuned in. That's kind of the sense that I got from him. Kohberger didn't say much about anything in the case in Moscow as he returned to his coursework at WSU. Pierce told the Statesman in the days after his arrest he was tracking it, Gilbertson said. On Kohberger's phone, investigators found several screenshots of local news stories and about the students' deaths. Just an hour earlier, members of the state and federal law enforcement burst into Kohberger's parents' home to arrest him and execute a search warrant. Kohberger was already awake upstairs and appeared to be sorting miscellaneous garbage. Again, so this is where I was kind of getting ahead of myself. He was sorting his garbage, and they couldn't find his. It's interesting. During overnight surveillance in the days leading up to his arrest, Kohberger was observed once, very late at night, walking in dark clothing around his parents' neighborhood. Reports that law enforcement witnessed him throwing trash away in his neighbor's garbage were untrue, Gilbertson said. Reports claim that, hold on one second. I moved this and then moved. Investigators, here we go. Reports that claim that they saw Kohberger using bleach to clean out his car, which he drove back to Pennsylvania with his father, were also false. So they didn't see him transporting garbage from one place to another, but he had to have done something with it. It wasn't in the garbage. They couldn't, I mean, obviously, if they found Bryan Kohberger's DNA, they would have used that instead of his father's, you know, to match to the sheath. So couldn't find it. He was going through it with baggie and gloves. So what he did with it, who knows? You would think if they were watching him so hard, they would have known. And as far as the bleaching in the car, they didn't know about him until December 20th. His vehicle was found inside of his garage. And from what I understand, and what we've seen in documents and in other interviews and reports, was there, no, actually, I think it was Bill Thompson stated in one of the hearings that there was a bucket of cleaner next to the car inside of the garage. So they may not have physically saw him, but it sounds like they were aware of him doing so. Gunderson goes on to say, I think that was online stuff. We did not ever through surveillance see that or observe that at all. Kohberger made a break for police Fort, as police forcibly entered and tried to get downstairs and headed for his room in the basement. He had a gun down there. He had a Glock down there, so I don't know if he's going down there to try to get a little crazy. Included in the search warrant list are a dozen items from police seized from the Kohberger home, were a Glock handgun, 2 items identified as green leafy substance, and a book with the underlining on page 118. Green leafy substance was found in a spare bedroom, so unknown if it was actually Bryan Kohberger's. The Glock, though, it had a sale of receipt and had 3 empty magazines, all indications that it was recently purchased. 3 magazines, too. It's interesting. It's an odd number to purchase. I'm assuming one came with the weapon, and then he bought 2 extras. Wonder what he was planning to do. The handgun was registered to Bryan Kohberger and found in his lower level bedroom with 3 empty magazines and a record of sale. The book, Gilbertson said, was titled Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Suzanne Jeffers, a self-help book about techniques for turning anger and indecision into action. Now, here we go. We got this book right here, and we got the page. Now, we don't know which part of it was underlined, but there's this big part that really kind of points at Bryan Kohberger. It states, getting back to my earlier example, if the outcome of your choosing to move to a new job is for you to lose that job within a few months, you now see how you will have the opportunity to strengthen your self-esteem by facing the storm, regrouping your inner forces, reaching out once again to find a new, perhaps more satisfying position. I believe that's probably what he had underlined. He got terminated. He had just moved. I mean, it sounds just like the situation that he was going through. And it seems like Bryan Kohberger was a type of person who searched and looked up anything that was currently going on in his life to find meaning or understanding of feelings behind how or what he's supposed to do in those scenarios. You know, we talked about his Tappa Talk stuff and how he was self-aware about his emotions and lack thereof and remorse at a very young age. You know, there's the searches that Dateline found out about psychopaths and sociopaths and things of that nature, where it kind of sounded like he was searching up himself, especially once we find out what he is capable and did do. Kohberger's disposition during the interview was calm and relaxed. Kohberger didn't ask why he was there until deep into their conversation. Gilbertson said the suspect showed no signs of anger, concern, or appearance of being rattled. But when he and Payne referenced the case in Moscow, Kohberger shut down and no longer was interested in talking. He sat back in his chair and he said he had the utmost respect for law enforcement, but that he had the constitutional right to have an attorney. The Idaho detectives concluded the interview. During his nearly 2.5 years in jail awaiting trial, Kohberger had hundreds of mostly video calls that were monitored by police, only with his mother, father, and 2 older sisters, outside of those with his attorneys. His mother and father were almost all of the calls, with his sisters also there most of the time, he said. It sounds like his mom and dad were on every call, and that there were some calls with the sisters, but it seems like most of those still had mom and dad. In none of the discussions did Kohberger family ever talk about the murders with their son and brother. Instead, the calls hovered on completely trivial stuff and never broached the issues of whether he killed the 4 students. That's interesting. Now, one bit, Gunnarsson said, the closest they would get is maybe speaking just briefly about the next motion or hearing coming up. And something's good going to come out of what we have coming up next, even as they lost motion after motion after motion. Love is blind, y'all. Love is blind. They were denial. They didn't believe that Bryan Kohberger, to me, it seems like they didn't want to believe. They didn't want to even, it seems like they were pretending he wasn't even there inside of jail, charged with what he was charged with. Love is blind. You know, and when I say that, it's not so much that I'm saying that you're going to fall in love with somebody and it doesn't matter what they appear like or look like. It's that when you love somebody, you don't see the things that they do right in front of you. As Kohberger's sentence hearing last month, attended by his mother and one of his sisters, Kohberger donned silver shackles and a belly chain with an orange jumper, which he should have for quite a while. He wasn't in front of a jury for the jury to think he's guilty or not. You know, that suit and tie was so that it wouldn't have an impact on a jury. There's never a jury in any of his hearings. His phone location data also indicated he returned to the King Road coverage area Later that morning, between 9:12 and 9:21 a.m., according to the probable cause affidavit signed by Payne, the King Road neighbor security camera did not show Kohberger's white Elantra again between those times. So Bryan Kohberger was within the area, but not in front of the house again. Now, we know that he searched up Broadcastify and he was looking up which were dispatching or broadcasting Whitcomb's 911, which was the 911 for Pullman and for Moscow. So he was listening in. He knew that they hadn't found him then. In my opinion, he goes back out there to see what's going on. There's no news. There's nothing on the Broadcastify, nothing happening. So he's went out there to check. Now, if he was aware that he left the knife sheath, I strongly suspect that he may not even have known he left the knife sheath. I think he got so tunnel vision during the first attack that he completely forgot that he left it on the bed. That's my opinion. I think that if he was aware of it, he left every door open. He left all these doors open. He could have easily gone back in. They pulled out a lot of the PPE stuff, booties and things of that nature from his apartment complex. We're looking at the pictures of his apartment when law enforcement were pulling things out of there. They had all those things in his complex. Could have easily have put on some booties and gone in there through one of the open doors, gone all the way up and looked around without having to touch anything. Obviously he probably would not have known where Dylan and Bethany were throughout that entire process, and it would have been a huge risk, but he could have done that, but he didn't come anywhere near it. In my opinion, and also based on the fact that he was Google searching Amazon knives and knife sheaths. When he was doing that, that tells me, I think he went and discarded his stuff, probably buried it if I had to take a guess. And because it's about control with him, right? If he goes and throws it in a river, he can't control it no more. So for me, I think he buried it. And he just hadn't gone back. I don't think he realized it wasn't in there because he's searching again. And to me, he probably, when he's searching for the knife and another knife, it's to commit another crime, probably so that he doesn't cross-contaminate anything, because people might go, well, why doesn't he go use the same knife? Well, then you're really going to have people looking out at you. One of the things that when it comes to like serial offenders that kind of gets them caught is that they connect the dots between them and all their cases, right? One of the main reasons some serial killers go free for a very long time is if they commit crimes in different areas, in different places, and law enforcement can connect those dots. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was trying to redo it again, and purchasing these items again to commit another crime. And, I think that if he was aware that he had lost or left that behind early on during that time, I struggle to believe that he would have been searching for those things in the manner that he was, in a manner that was so traceable, so to speak. All right, let's continue this. Later that day, Kohberger cell data showed that he traveled from Pullman south of the area of Clarkston, Washington. The surveillance video showed that he exited his Elantra and walked into an Albertsons in Clarkston. He went through the self-checkout and bought only a prepackaged Starbucks Frappuccino coffee drink. Kohberger left the grocery store about 1 p.m. and pinged again to a cell tower just after 5:30 p.m., 25 miles north of Johnson, Washington. What Kohberger did during that time, and also during another 3-hour window where his cell phone again stopped reporting to the network until 8:30, remains unknown. We, of course, went through thousands of times in our hopes to try to locate either the clothes or that he may have changed out of, or certainly the murder weapon. Extensive searches. I think it's likely that he could have thrown that knife into a river from one of the bridges. I don't think so, because you lose a lot of control doing that. You can't go back and get it. You don't know where the water can wash it up, and so many other things. It could just wash up somewhere and somebody can find it. I don't think it's I don't know if it's in the water. The case's lead investigator acknowledged it's possible that when Kohberger drove to Lewiston, he could have just wanted to get out of town to burn off a lot of nervous energy, a matter of hours after the crime. Yeah, but he also turned off his phone in the area that he was the night before, when his phone was turned off by Johnson, Washington, for a significant amount of time. To me, it's more indicating that he went out there back to locate or relocate or move certain things. 2 surviving roommates called 911 at the home at 11:56 that morning. He's got to be wondering, why has nothing happened? No police, no calls, no nothing. I think that's where he goes ahead and makes the trip down to Lewiston. Is it to get rid of stuff? I don't know. We can't say because we never found anything. The knife was never found, and it wasn't from a lack of tips. The decision error that led to Kohberger to leave the knife sheath behind was likely on account of Kernodle. She was still awake and was still in the middle of eating a late-night order of Jack in the Box delivered by the DoorDash. Kernodle most likely heard Mogen and Goncalves in distress and went upstairs to check on them. She certainly did go upstairs. Fortunately, that's what stopped him up there and caused him to screw up and leave the knife sheath. Was either hearing or seeing Xana, and then that took his attention away, and he followed her down the stairs to her bedroom. See, the problem I have with this is the fact that Dylan heard Murphy going up the stairs with who she thought was Kaylee, but obviously wasn't Kaylee, it was Xana, before running downstairs saying someone's here. So for Murphy to go up the stairs with Xana, to begin with, he must have gone down at a certain point. Now, she was on her TikTok till 4:16 a.m. per documents. I know that the PCA says 4:12, but on an April 3rd, 2023 warrant from TikTok, it stated that she was on there until 4:16 Pacific Standard Time. And so that makes a little bit of sense because that's about a minute before the altercation is heard in her bedroom. And that house isn't very large for her to walk from her bedroom up the stairs and back down the stairs at a high speed or a faster pace because somebody's behind her. 60 seconds is more than doable. So what I believe happened, based on also the fact, we also have to include the fact that Bryan Kohberger parked in the back of the house shortly before 4:08 a.m. So that's about 8 minutes before Xana is off of her TikTok. So for Kohberger to go into the house and go upstairs, and to me, and we know that from documents, we believe that Murphy was in Kaylee's room. Now, one of the reasons we can deduce that is because, again, Xana's on TikTok till 4:16. If Bryan Kohberger walks into Maddie's room, and if Murphy's in there and he bolts out of there because he's scared, because he also doesn't have any blood on him, so he wasn't there during the actual altercation, so he gets out of there. I'm assuming that interaction where that forces, or that interruption that forces Xana to get off of her TikTok happens much earlier than 4:16. So to me, I think that Murphy's obviously in Kaylee's room. Now, that tells me that Bryan Kohberger went into Maddie's room, committed the murders, and then went into Kaylee's room, or opened the door at least, where Murphy would have gone down the stairs and ran into Xana's room. Now, if that ends up being the case, then he would have already left the knife sheath behind. So I think he was just super focused in on what he was doing in that bedroom that he just absolutely forgot about it. Then he went, opened the door to Kaylee's room. Murphy runs downstairs. He stays up there to see what happens. And unfortunately, Xana gets up, takes Murphy up the stairs. Probably, in my opinion, they see Bryan Kohberger turn around and run down the stairs back, because Murphy runs out the back door. Murphy doesn't follow Xana into her room. He runs out the back door. And you can hear him barking on the audio 50 feet away. And it's been determined that barking came from outside of the house. So he was barking at the same time as the altercation that was happening in that bedroom with Bryan Kohberger and Ethan and Xana. And so I think that's most likely what happened. But I guess it is possible the way he put it. For 2 hours, Kohberger sat at the defense table between his attorneys, watching the families and friends who lost someone they loved without any expression. Really quiet and emotional, Gilbertson said of Kohberger. He blinked a little bit more a couple of times during that, and he looked around, very much just flowing and just going through the process. And that's going to be it, guys. I'm going to be back on tonight with Dr. Vona. Just a couple of hours. We're going to talk about this, the other article, and some of the other stuff a little bit higher in detail. You don't want to miss it. Again, thanks for everybody that's checked in on my father. I appreciate that. I'll be back on tonight. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section. That being said, I'm out of here. Peace.